Hi there, I'm Paul Nadeau, and I am the author of a book called, I'm just going to get it here, Take Control of Your Life. And this is what it looks like. It is available through all online bookstores, and in most bookstores across North America, you can either order it or find it in the bookstores. There's a second edition that just came out, so let me grab that. I'll show you what the second edition looks like. This was just released about 2 weeks ago. So the chances are that if you do order it online, this is what you'll find. This is what will come. It's a smaller edition, meaning that it's just the size. It's more of a pocket book. The other one is a little bit bigger. However, same content, same great stuff, and really worth the read, even if I do say so myself. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and then get into how the book was written. So I came from a very abusive background. If you've listened to my TED Talk, you'll have an understanding of my earlier years. I grew up in a home where there was a lot of violence. My father was a very violent alcoholic who used to beat my mother and my brother and I. And living in that home was living in fear all the time. I wasn't getting much attention at home, so I acted out in school. And I began to believe at a very young age that I was not worthy of love and that I wouldn't amount to anything. I became depressed when I was just a small kid. And I would go to school and I would act out and I would always get the strap, because back then they could actually physically give you the strap and it hurt. And whenever we had to write a test or do some kind of project, I always failed at it. And as was customary in one of my teacher's classes, whenever we wrote a test, he would call the person with the lowest grade to the front of the class, and that person was usually me. No, let me rephrase that. That person was always me. So I was called to the front of the class first because I had the lowest grade. It was the walk of shame, but I was accustomed to it. I was programmed to believe that I was a failure. I had been told I was a failure by my teachers as well. And when you condition yourself, when you start to believe the negativity that people tell you or that you tell yourself, it has a way of manifesting itself in so many terrible ways. For one, you can become anxious and depressed and believe the BS that you tell yourself or that other people tell you. You stop believing in your ability to amount to something. And it really becomes a self-professing prophecy, or however that's said. You start to believe this nonsense that you can't possibly amount to something. That's how I felt about myself. Now in grade 7, something happened that kind of changed everything. That one teacher I told you about, I think he did this on purpose. When I reflect all these years back at it, I think he did this on purpose. What he did was, well, in grade 7, I liked girls and, I felt embarrassed that I was the bad boy of the class. And he had this one test coming up. And he says, I expect everybody in the classroom to pass except for you, Nadeau. I already know that you're going to fail. For some reason, on that particular day, hearing that particular message, it shamed me. I felt ashamed of myself. And I went back home. And for the very first time, I cracked open the book, started studying, and did my very best, even though I wasn't accustomed to studying. I didn't know how to study. I didn't have good study habits. Grade 7, I'd never studied up until then. I suspect that the reason that I passed from grade to grade to grade was because my teachers didn't want me in their class the next year. But on this occasion, I studied and I wrote that test. He started calling the names after he had graded the tests, and mine was not the first one to be called. My name was not the second one to be called, and it wasn't the third one to be called. And one by one, students other than myself were being called to the front of the classroom to pick up their papers. Halfway through the class, my classmates are kind of looking back at me going, hey, why aren't you there? And I kind of thought, I don't know. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking one of two things. I was thinking, I think I did pretty good on that test because I knew the answers. That was the first thing. And then the second thing was, again, self-sabotage. Oh, maybe you did really bad, and he's just waiting to embarrass you even worse. But no, I knew the answers. And so I had some confidence. 3 people were left. There was my cousin, Lise, and another girl named Giselle, and my cousin and Giselle, they were the Browners of the classroom. They always competed for the top grade. And there was me. So there were 3 of us. My cousin Lise got called next, and that left Giselle and I. And I was the second last to be called. My name was called next. And it wasn't the walk of shame that I took. For the very first time, I felt pretty proud of myself. And I went and I picked up that paper, and I walked proudly back to my seat, to the amazement of all my classmates. That was a defining moment for me. That was a moment where I started to believe that I could actually do something. I could achieve something. And this is what is missing in so many people's lives, is the belief in themselves, that they are greater than their circumstances, and that they can change their circumstances whenever they choose to. It's not so much what happens to us that matters, it's how we respond to what happens that does. And how and what we tell ourselves is imperative. We've got to program that negative self-chatter in our heads. We've got to program it to get the heck out and reprogram ourselves with great new chatter. So my book, How to Take Control of Your Life, or Hostage to Myself, is about how we do hostage ourselves. Now let me go into how this book came to be. I did become the police officer that I had promised myself when I was a kid. After the many beatings from my father, I told myself that when I grew up, I was going to be a policeman so I could arrest people like my father, and I became a cop at 21. I then applied for a number of different jobs with a new attitude, that new attitude that I believed in myself. And I became a detective, and I became a hostage negotiator, an international peacekeeper, a polygraph examiner. There wasn't anything, or pretty much there was very little that I didn't get when I applied for it. And I credit that to the belief that I had in myself and to my newly created habits, or they weren't new. I created them over years. So with that kind of attitude, I think there's very little that is not possible. Now the book, let's get back to the book. Had not at any time thought about writing a book, yet people were telling me, you've got such an interesting background, Paul. You should write a book. You should. And I was saying, hey, thanks, guys, but no, I'm a storyteller. I love to tell stories, but I don't think I'm going to be writing a book. Then one week, 3 people, strangers to me, each told me I should write a book. Now, I do believe that the universe I believe that the universe often sends us messages. Sometimes we don't listen. The first one, I was invited to a private club in Toronto by somebody who linked in with me, and he said, we got to talk. And he bought me lunch in this private club, and I was happy to join him. And he says, Paul, you ought to write a book. And his name is Perry Gladstone, and I thank Perry because he was one of the 3 people who encouraged me that week to write a book. And I said, Perry, I appreciate that, but I think I'm okay. And then a couple of days later, somebody else told me. And then a couple of days later, somebody else told me. So the universe goes like this. You ought to write a book. And you go, oh, no, not me. And then the universe says, I told you, you got to write a book. And you say, yeah, I know you told me. And then that third time, it slaps you across the face and says, you have got to write a book. And if you don't listen to those messages, you miss out. And I'll tell you, you miss out on some great opportunities because I listened. It took 3 shots, but I listened. And because of that, and because of sitting down and actually picking up a book on how to write a book, because I had no clue how to do it, and sitting down and reading the first 40 pages, should have read the whole thing because I missed a lot of content that I later had to go back and revisit and redo. But I wrote it. And it took about 2.5 years to get it out, and I self-published it. And as fate would have it, or as the universe would have it, a copy of my self-published book was picked up by an editorial director at HarperCollins, who then invited me for coffee, pulled out my book and said, we would like to publish this across the world. And I said, yes. And that's how this book came to be. So there are some lessons that I'm going to impart with you in these videos, but also in my book. So I really encourage you to read my book. Who is this book for? Well, it's for everybody. This book talks and it provides a number of guideposts on how we can improve our current circumstances. It helps people deal with anxiety, depression, self-sabotage. I've received several emails from readers who have told me how much this book has helped them with their anxiety, depression, and so many more human conditions that most of us suffer from at some point in our life. Leonard Cohen, the Canadian songwriter, sadly deceased, he wrote a lyric in a song called Anthem. It was a 1990 song, and this lyric really stood out for me. He said, there's a crack in everything, but that's how the light gets through. And when we think about that for a moment, there's a crack in everything. There's a crack in every one of us. Every one of us has suffered a crack or two or a break. Nobody gets through this life unscathed. We all suffer at some point. We all feel down or blue or depressed or challenged, whatever it is. But we can overcome just about everything because we are limitless. So I'm going to help you get there. And I want you to know that you can take control of your life. I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning of my book, just to give you an idea of what it's about. You know what would be great now? Me reading a little bit from my book. What would be great is if there was a fireplace behind me, and the lights were down and everything was looking great, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? And then I'd have to lower my voice, and give you one of these. But here it is, the preface. It's been said that it's not so much what happens to us that matters. It's how we respond to what happens that does. In my years as a trained investigator, hostage negotiator, and international peacekeeper, I was privileged to meet and observe people from all walks of life, each with unique stories, attitudes, and experiences. I watched how an almost identical set of circumstances frequently affected individuals very differently, due in part to their backgrounds, their ability to process thoughts, and the value that they would attach to an event. I've witnessed very different responses from hostage victims who had experienced similar events, and I have marveled at the choices they made because of those events. While we are each endowed with a fundamental ability to choose our responses to whatever injustices, hardships, and dilemmas come our way, factors such as fear can and often do eat away at our confidence. And I'll stop it there for now. Fear. Fear is a 4-letter word. And we have to move beyond our fear. We have to use our fear to catapult ourselves through whatever mess we are facing. Theodore Roosevelt once said, when you find yourself going through hell, keep going. Fear sometimes immobilizes us to the point where we give in to it, and we don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. So what we have to do is face our fear and move beyond it. Now, you're probably asking, well, that's a lot easier said than done. It certainly is. It's a lot easier said than done, but it can be done, and it must be done, because if you give into your fear, you're afraid of no, let's take something small, asking for a job, asking for a date. You're allowing your fear to prevent you from taking that chance, that risk, the risk of being told no. What's the big deal? The big deal is that you may be told no, and you shouldn't take most everything personally. It happens. By allowing yourself to be controlled by fear, you'll never move beyond whatever circumstance it is that you're facing. And that could lead to stress and hardship. So I'm going to leave you with this for now, and I'll be coming back and providing you with more videos. If there is something that is preventing you from moving forward, something that you're fearful of doing, think about it deeply and imagine yourself being victorious to whatever the circumstances are. And what I mean by that is paint an image in your head of what it would look like to move beyond that fear and do whatever it is that you're being called to do. Because sometimes we find ourselves in the worst circumstances, but if you stay there, that hell stays with you. You're better than that. You're stronger than that. And you can control that. So if there's something that is preventing you from moving forward, take its power away. Tell yourself that whatever it is that is holding you back is something that you can control. Nothing and no one should keep you from moving forward and doing the things that you deserve to do and living the life that you deserve to live. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you soon.